Hello, my name is Todd Fredson. I'm grateful to be participating in the conference, at least virtually. My presentation considers a book published by Ivorian poet Azo Vauguy in 2009 in relation to the ethnic violence and civil wars of the last decade in West Africa's Ivory Coast. The presentation is titled Ivoirité, the Politics of Ethnic Identity in Azo Vauguy's Zakwato. It begins with this epigraph, a witness account excerpted from a 2001 Human Rights Watch report. The pregnant woman lost her baby. Another woman had one of her ears sewn back on. In 2009, Ivorian poet Azo Vauguy published Zakwato. It's a single book-length poem, a myth Vauguy worked for 25 years to translate out of its oral-keeping and ethnic language, Beté, into written French. The timing of its eventual publication places Zakwato in a crucial political moment. Côte d'Ivoire's first civil war, from 2002 to 2007, ended with the 2008 reconciliation agreement and the promise of a presidential election. Vauguy's note of dedication in Zakwato to then-President Laurent Gbagbo offers the book in support of an ideological position. Gbagbo and his supporters promoted a rigid nationalism defined by the concept Ivoirité, which determines belonging by regional and ethnic affiliation. While rendering a thoughtful and accomplished translation of the Beté myth, Vauguy also provides an effective contour to the political rhetoric. In order to show how Vauguy manages this, I'm going to look at how the text stages its story of psychological transformation, how the notion of Ivoirité is bundled into the myth, and broadly where the text fits into the anti- and post-colonial literature of West Africa. To the title Zakwato, Vauguy adds, Pour que ma terre ne dorme plus jamais, so that my land never sleeps again. Zakwato is the myth of a man trusted by his village to watch for an enemy force, but he falls asleep and his village is ambushed. Zakwato wakes and is faced with the massacre. Bereft, he wanders toward a distant smith who will remove his eyelids so that his vigilance never again softens. Zakwato's journey to the straightener of iron, Blenyon Zato, is a haunted journey. The tragedy that prompts it is presented en route through dream torments, recollections scarcely separated from his waking world, and less so as he travels. The fromager, baobabs, palm trees, the irko with its notoriously deep roots. Zakwato prays these giants will be ripped from the ground with his words. The songs of the Turako are the songs of sorrow. The sky inhales all the sins the earth has cried. During Zakwato's journey, the physical landscape converges with an immaterial, a spiritual realm. To overcome obstacles, manifestations of the evil that has snuffed out honest souls, Zakwato transforms himself. He becomes a snake or a bird, Gofo Niniwa, the long-legged wader bird. He shapes himself according to his encounters. Zakwato is addressed by many names, one of which finally is the man of many names. In West African cultures, and notably the Beté, men, sometimes women, are often given several names. Each characterizes the person based on personal traits, professional functions, talents, memorable encounters, etc. Zakwato is ultimately recognized by the mission he undertakes, named by the stages of transformation and his breaking through to a new state of mind. The narrative delivery is punctuated by refrains, cries as it were, and declarations, often commands. The delivery becomes incantatory. It is motivated by repetition. It rained, rained, and the repetition is the onwardness of Zakwato. Vauguy employs a constant wordplay with marché, walked and worked. Il marchait, Zakwato marchait. His walk is his work. Just as the traumatic event that precipitated his journey presents itself through fragmented remembrances, the future flashes into that shared moment. What Blenyon Zato is to do, ripping out Zakwato's eyelids, is being accomplished by the journey itself. So long as Zakwato trains his attention on the destination, his dedication makes it metaphorically present. As Zakwato walks toward the distant forger, Zakwato's vision expands. Throughout the story's narrator speaks of Zakwato. Zakwato woke himself, staggered, a starved chameleon. He sat, arms and legs crossed, then pushed a long and noisy sigh of hopelessness. But then also, the narrator turns to address Zakwato directly. This direct address is also aimed at the reader. The reader pivots from observer looking over the shoulder of the narrator to participant now aligned with Zakwato. And the narrator is Zakwato's, is our sympathetic guide, goading, instructing. Gather the moon and the sun, tip the bowl of fire and the bowl of milk, inexhaustible teats. Cradle, tomb, fanciful sourness that betrays a life spanning the angels and demons. Cruel mother never suspected, escape of the shadows that pass in silence. The world is spilling and spilt. Country without voice, without law, without commitment, without roots, without landmarks. That voice of narration is the metacognition toward which Zakwato advances. As the reader slips into the role of Zakwato's companion, Zakwato reciprocally marches out of the book. Zakwato, in fact, must initially be summoned into the text. The book's opening passage is an invocation from which the man of many names seems to arrive. The exalting word comes to me, so that through uncooperative ears this rabble understands. The naked word finds me to reveal the truth to those who are backwards. I'm not the dew, which limits its adventures to mopping up the bushes. I'm not the drizzle, happy with spitting on the ground to relieve the earth's thirst. I am the thunderstorm, I am the tempest, and I am the flood. Voice, my voice breaks the enthusiasm of irrational forces. I am the feline who toys with the lovers when night closes its eyes. I am the dove that carries the golden fruit of paradise under its wings. Zakwato. Enabled by the presence of a reader or listener, the narrative voice explains the condition of Zakwato's emergence, calling for Zakwato, offering itself as a carrier, a path to embodiment. Zakwato is not only speaker or spoken to, he's also the speaking act. Writing in the Ivorian paper Notre Voix, Abdoulaye Villard Sanogo suggests that in our reading of this tragedy, we think of a scene that combines song, dance, story, tale, and myth. Poet Henri Nkomo refers to Vauguy as a neo-oralist. The long poem performs. Vauguy triangulates a space of encounter, a stage, and the reader, like the narrator in Zakwato, has a role, one that sometimes resembles that of authorship as the narrator recedes in the voice of Zakwato, who we've been positioned alongside or inside of, makes direct address. There is initially a sense of direction to the journey, but it may be more appropriate ultimately to say that there's a sense of motion. Departure and destination converge into a state of constant arrival, and the urgency of each moment becomes highly focalized. As Vauguy remarked in an interview, I interrogated the past to speak to the present and read the future. Vauguy constructs a non-Euclidean space, which is perhaps also myth time. With its celebration of vigilance and resistance, this text of Zakwato positions itself as part of a post-colonial literary canon. Despite its alignment with an antagonistic nationalism, one might see the poem continuing the work of Bernard Dadier, an Ivorian poet who used folktales to engage with the social and political world of his time. Our godfather, remarks Bua Fidel Diomande, the general director of Valles Editions, which published Zakwato. Josué Gbagbo, who assumed leadership of the Association of Ivorian Writers in 2011, also makes a comparison to Dadier. Gbagbo's complete comment in an interview, though, highlights the way in which the recent ethnic violence is often glossed over as a traditional anti-colonial struggle, the continued confrontation with the West. When asked what he made of the 2011 post-electoral crisis in Côte d'Ivoire, sometimes referred to as the Second Civil War, Gbagbo replied, "There is no post-election crisis in Côte d'Ivoire. What we saw unroll before us is the logical result of a secular harassment. We have this unique and historic opportunity to be contemporaries of Bernard Dadier, and we have no right to ignore what takes place. These concerns about the question of our self-determination. I do not deny the fact that Côte d'Ivoire is in the grip of some contradictions, but I say that some minor questions here are overblown to hide the essential truth. Yet all African countries will have to one day revisit the problem of their relationship to the West." Zakwato does provide a resistance to the West, to the neo-colonialism that is at the heart of a globalized marketplace. Vauguy subverts that sense of capitalist time, the characterization of time as something that adds up. Time is money, time is spent, notion of progress. Vauguy's myth time resists such linear accounting. His eternal in-the-moment mode of composition, where consciousness shuttles between observer, author, and subject, proposes a regard for both the global and the immersed perspective. As poet Nkomo reasons, Vauguy's poetry terroriste knows how to serve the concerns of our time. Africa, claimed and defended by Vauguy, is ordered to tear open its eyes and refuse sleep. But when Vauguy writes, Zakwato goes off with his eyelids goes with his eyelids torn off to knot a new dawn and fight for the new homeland, Africa, Africa. Whose homeland is this? Who are the foreigners that are being watched for? Vauguy's cri de coeur has the ring of Pan-Africanism forwarded by the negritude thinkers, but where negritude thinkers attempted to overcome objections about exclusion, trying to include Arabs and Berbers, Vauguy's approach is essentialist. Vauguy's sense of homeland is aligned with a specific political lineage. The authentically African in Côte d'Ivoire, those of my country, belong to Iberni. People of Iberni, woa, here is Bagnon. People of my country, woa, here is Bagnon. Nogbe Krogbe proposed Iberni as a new name for Côte d'Ivoire in a 1970 speech. Against what had settled into a one-party system, Krogbe proposed a violent dispossession. It is too late at present to dream of elections. We must fight now. We must fight with all our means, even with our bare hands. Blood speaks better to the masses because it is the true language of politics. For Vauguy, Iberni becomes a sort of prelapsarian state. Zakwato becomes the model Ivorian. Bagnon means the most beautiful man in Beté. Woa is a traditional reply within and across many tribes in Côte d'Ivoire, and continues to be used as a confirmation by people listening to tales. Woa in this passage has the additional connotation of warriors at attention. Zakwato, Le Bagnon, is the beautiful warrior, the patriot. His heroic awakening is tangled with a violent nationalistic impulse. If this impulse was intended to drive out Western or more generally non-African influence, it has sharpened itself still further. A constitutional revision following the 2000 coup required any presidential candidate to have proof that both parents were born in Côte d'Ivoire. The legal revision was applied as a cultural policy by Gbagbo supporters. The policy instituted the notion of Ivoirité that would gain currency during Gbagbo's presidency. While the term came into use in 1995 with then-President Henri Konan Bédier and was intended to reflect the common cultural heritage of all Ivorians, its more xenophobic connotation reports that northern ethnic groups are more culturally akin to regional neighbors, ethnicities influenced by the Islamic kingdoms that came and went along the Niger River in what is now Mali. The French-drawn borders divided ethnic groups on every side, though less the south, which is coastal. Ivoirité rehearses an anti-colonial sentiment that has expanded to include the descendants of laborers brought from around the region to coastal plantations, and also those who relocated south during the post-independence boom. These workers were stranded effectively as Côte d'Ivoire, like other national liberation states, ran up against adjustments made by G7 countries beginning in the 70s. Ivoirité converts the protest against international instruments of control, such as economic liberalization policies, into a battle about national belonging and cultural citizenship. Zakwato aestheticizes the cultural policy of Ivoirité. At the time of Zakwato's publication, the presidential election that had been deferred for nearly a decade was on the horizon. Gbagbo had maintained the presidency through a disputed election, the first civil war in the country's division. In 2011, after losing the election and refusing to leave office, Gbagbo was removed by French and UN forces amidst the Second Civil War. In his dedications, Vauguy offers gratitude to Gbagbo, who is also Beté, whose counsel has guided my pen, Vauguy writes, including the epithet seplu as a term of endearment. Seplu is a pathfinding bird in the Beté culture. The Beté culture supplies Vauguy with a stock of myths. Myths he knows because he has long sucked the breasts of the village, its traditions, before coming to settle in the city, explains Nkomo. Vauguy's depiction of what constitutes an Ivorian is rooted in his ethnic heritage, and he seeks to broaden this heritage beyond the Beté culture, positioning Zakwato not only as a Beté myth, but as an origin story for the nation of Iberni. That Vauguy worked on translating this myth into written French for 25 years is not to indicate that he's a slow producer. To the contrary, I'm suggesting that the work was profoundly important to Vauguy. He's committed to both its aesthetics and its ideological positioning. Thank you. Have a good conference. And if you want to contact me regarding any of my research, sources, assertions, etc., my email is Todd with 2 Ds, Allen, A-L-A-N, Fredson, F-R-E-D-S-O-N, @gmail.com.